All right, so a lot of people are beginning to panic again about the whole, I mean, the idea that cases are going up, at least mainly in Canada. I don't know about the States, but I mean, you look at the big Canadian provinces, the cases have gone up in all of them, in Alberta, BC, Ontario, and Quebec, to varying degrees. And honestly, it's probably not due to schools reopening because schools have only been open for upwards of a week. Usually you'd wait a couple weeks to make a judgment on that. So I don't think it has that much to do with schools. Actually, I do think it does to a little degree, in that there's probably a decent amount of kids that otherwise wouldn't have been tested, that their parents decided to get them tested for. The school made them get tested, and they were discovered. So I do think that that is a little bit of it, but I do think that um, it's mostly just natural, right? And the first thing I wanted to point out here is that pretty well every major city in Canada, and not to mention too many major businesses like Walmart, Superstore, places like that, require masks countrywide, right? So the first thing I wanted to point out is that at what point are we going to admit that masks don't do anything and having a mask mandate is pointless? I mean, given the fact that the people that supported the lockdowns still haven't admitted the lockdowns didn't work, my guess is never. I would bet that we'll probably be forced to wear masks for at least till the end of this next spring, probably longer for all we know. It all depends on how long they plan to push this out for, because if they really wanted to, I mean, speaking of when the virus will come to an end, if they really wanted to, you know, get over it, they would have done the Sweden approach. And like I've been saying is that, or sorry, I haven't been saying, but like I've been pointing out, that Sweden has um, pretty much gotten over it. I mean, like you look at Corey Morgan here pointing out, even CNN is forced to note that Sweden is doing rather well these days despite having no mandated lockdown or masks. And again, if we're at the point to where like the big mainstream media outlets, the bias, outlets are even admitting that Sweden's approach worked, like I think it's safe to say, like, I mean, it's been safe to say for a long time, but even amongst the paranoid crowd, like, again, at what point are we going to admit that we went about it the wrong way? And like I say, it's not too late to do the Sweden approach, too. People think it's too late. No, it isn't too late. I mean, the one thing that Sweden did get wrong, though, which this is another reason why you know that the pro lockdown crowd is just a bunch of crazy paranoid zealots, that the one thing Sweden did get wrong is they didn't, have enough, emphasis put on nursing homes. Now, pretty well everywhere got that wrong too. It's not like there was anywhere that got that right, at least that I know of, as far as a major country goes. But the looking back on it and going forward too, people say, "Oh, it's just looking back on it. We can't dwell on that." But we can dwell on it because this is still a massive issue. So the clear solution going forward is simply to have protections and precautions in place when it comes to old people, and as far as everyone else goes, your life should look exactly the same as it did pre this whole pandemic situation. It should look exactly the same, aside from when you're visiting older relatives. Now, again, the argument that they always come up with, which is stupid because they don't even believe it, is, oh, well, you gotta lock down and wear a mask to for other people, right? It's not for your safety, it's for other people. Again, we don't allow that. We don't have that way of thinking when it comes to anything else, right? Like, we don't have that way of thinking when it comes to anything else. We don't say people aren't allowed to smoke a pack a day, or drink a case of beer or a 2 6 a day. We don't allow that in. We don't allow people to say, yeah, you're not allowed to. We're not going to allow you to eat McDonald's every day. No, we don't have that in any other way situation in society, which we should to an extent. The difference being is that obesity and the negative health effects of smoking and poor diet is causes far greater harm to society than a virus with a death rate that's the same as the flu, right? Like, come on, like it's not even comparable. So anyway, that's the first thing I wanted to bring up too. That even the mainstream media is admitting that Sweden's approach worked. Like even the mainstream media is admitting it. So, yeah, a good point to bring up. And this is from Global News, and Greg here on Twitter responds by saying, the report highlights Statistics Canada data showing suicide is now the leading cause of death for children between the ages of 10 and 14. Gee, I wonder why. Now, um, what are the reasons that are causing this? I think that there's a ton of reasons, but the big ones being, I would say, is, I mean, number one, we've locked down, right? Like these kids aren't able to, socialize at the same. I mean, they're not even allowed to go out too. Like, I mean, we've had playgrounds and stuff like that shut down for a lot of this time. So that's causing it. I think the fact that we live in an overly nihilistic society, that's definitely going, coming into play. We brainwash the what out of these kids talking about, oh, climate change is going to kill us all within the next decade and all this stuff. And not only that too, we have like those are the main things, I believe. Like those are the main things, is that number one, we drastically overemphasize the potential negative things that could happen in these kids' lives, like drastically when it comes to this whole virus situation, when it comes to climate change, all this kind of stuff, which is one of the many reasons that's causing, or I would say the main reasons that's causing the epidemic of anxiety that goes on today and in recent times, is that we completely and utterly lie to the nth degree to these people. Um, I think that's another thing too. Not to mention too, we live in a society where you're not allowed to disagree with people. You're not allowed to have differing thoughts. We teach kids to hate the way that traditional families exist too. Like there's so many things that we're just bombarding these people. Like, this is the stuff that we're doing isn't even enough for adults to handle, to let alone people who are barely even developed, right? Like you're 10 to 14, your brain is not even close to being developed, right? Like you still got another decade to go, maybe a little more. So the idea of this is it's crazy, right? Like the fact that this isn't something that's bigger than, like, this should be as big of a news story as this stupid virus situation. Like this should be as big of a story, but why is it not a bigger story? Because um, talking about this and making this a bigger story would force people to look themselves in the mirror and be like, where did we go wrong? Like, where did we go wrong? Now, most people, their solution to it will just be more of the same. It's, oh, we don't have enough brainwashing. We don't have enough socialism. We don't have enough, um, you know, talking about all that kind of stuff that I brought up, basically. But so that's the big problem too. And for the people that are kind of in the middle, and um, don't go along with all that stuff, it makes people feel very uncomfortable. Like, and this is why when you look at people these days, the moral stance that people seem to take these days are the ones that require the least you know they have the least to lose by holding those beliefs, right? Like standing up for climate change. Like, what do you have to lose for that? Like, you have everything to gain because it appears like you care about the climate and you care about the future, but you know, pointing out that the government of Canada is running a debt of upwards of $500 billion this year, and how that's literally physically impossible to maintain. Well, you're just the worst person in the world because you want poor people to die. You don't want people to get health care, right? Like, this is the problem, because again, in these people's world, they live in the fantasy world that, you know, anybody who can't afford something, we can just give them free money, right? Because there's an unlimited, because in these people's minds there's an unlimited supply, right? Even though there isn't, they think that there's an unlimited supply. And because of that, they think, and rightfully so, like if there was an unlimited supply, and we would never have, the bills would never come due, our credit rating would never get destroyed, the dollar would never get devalued to the point of no return, then yeah, we should give people free everything. But the problem is that's not reality, right? Like, that's not reality. So yeah, that's the other thing to bring up there. But again, this should be a much bigger news story, but it isn't, because again, it makes people uncomfortable, because And the reason it makes people uncomfortable, like I said, is that the only things that are going to fix the problems are things that people really don't like to talk about. Like people just don't like to talk about those kind of things, so they just sweep it under the rug. But anyway, the next thing I wanted to bring up is from Rod Dreher here. He says, Northwestern U Law School had a town hall meeting online recently. Everybody began with a ritual denunciation of themselves as a racist. Reader Prof. Speta is not a racist. He's a wonderful man, usually loved by students. It makes me sad that he is forced to say otherwise. Yeah, and Matt Walsh responds by saying, if you can't see this is clearly a cult, it's only because you're in the cult. And this is the problem too, that this stuff is becoming more and more common these days. Like this whole marching around and forcing people to salute to Black Lives Matter, and um, forcing people to adhere to an ideology that has no factual backing behind it, and even if it does, it's only pretending to care about that issue to push a larger agenda of, far left, basically. And by that I mean BLM pretends to care about racial equity and all this kind of stuff under the guise of pushing these far left ideologies, right? Like again, if they actually cared about Black lives, they would be talking at nauseum about the hundreds of people that are shot every year in Chicago and many other U.S. cities, right? Like the biggest issue to them is the what 10 to 15 unarmed blacks that are killed by police a year. That's the biggest issue. You don't care about the what is it, like 7 8 thousand other blacks that are killed by other blacks. They don't care about the millions of blacks that are still enslaved to this day. The fact that they never bring that up just goes to show that the real issue here isn't Black Lives Matter. It's only an incredibly fringe minority of Black Lives Matter. If you want to call it that, yeah, go ahead, but don't pretend like it's Black Lives Matter as a whole, because if it was, police shootings would be an afterthought. It's not that we shouldn't try and improve the way policing is done. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that if you're if your goal is to bring change in society, you don't step over the largest pile of bodies and deal with the smallest pile of bodies first, right? Like this doesn't make any sense. So anyway, the last thing I wanted to bring up is from the CCFR. They're having their Integrity March on 2 days from now on Saturday at 1 p.m. Eastern in Ottawa. I just wanted to bring it up because it's very good that we now have an organization in Canada that's actually standing up for gun rights. I mean, the CCFR has been around for I think 4 or 5 years. I've been following for most of that time, but um, we had gun rights organizations, but we had none that were mainstream, right? Like we had none that were mainstream. I mean, the CCFR is still not mainstream to an extent. Like if you ask people name a gun rights organization, the first thing they think of is the NRA, right? Like the day that people think of the CCFR, as much as they think of the NRA, then we'll know that they made it, right? And the other thing too is like the NRA isn't a massively pro-gun organization. They're pro-gun, but if you ask the most pro-gun people in the states, many of them will tell you that the NRA isn't even the best gun rights organization in the states. So it shows just how little the average Canadian knows, right? But again, it's good that we have a gun rights organization in Canada. There's good things and there's bad things that could become of this, and let's hope that the bad things don't. The bad things is the gun ban goes through, right? Like if the gun ban, if these lawsuits don't, reverse the gun ban, then Canada's pretty much finished, at least when it comes to gun laws, because that gives them carte blanche to ban whatever they want for no reason, right? Like they can ban whatever they want for no apparent reason. And if they get this through, I would bet a lot of money, because I'm not 100% sure, but I'm 99% sure within the next, if they win another election, they may even have it as their next election platform, as a outright handgun ban, or a outright, or at the very least having even more restrictions, right? Like having even more restrictions. Now I don't know how they would even, what more they could have, but they'll find a way, right? Like they'll find a way. And not to mention too, they'll probably call for a ban of all semi-auto rifles as well, because at this point it's just not most, probably like 70-80% of semi-autos are now banned, considering the fact that the AR-15 and Ruger Mini 14, those are two very popular guns. You got the M14, you got I mean, they're adding new ones, it seems like every day. So for all you know, it'll be on there. But the good thing that could become of this is I think it's woken a lot of Canadian gun owners up, and even Canadians that believe in the concept of a just society, that um, we need to stand up for these kind of things, right? And the CCFR has grown massively over the last, 6 months or so. I mean, their YouTube channel is more than doubled in subscribers. My guess is that they've gotten more donations. I mean, you'd have to look into it, but my guess is that they've gotten more donations in the last 6 months than they have in their entire history, if I had to guess. I'd be pretty confident in making that guess. But nonetheless, that is the good thing that will become of this, is that we've woken up. They have woken up, and a lot of people that have supported them have woken up a lot of Canadians to the reality that the government can take it all away on a whim. So that's the last thing I want. And again, if you're from the area, you know people in the area, you should probably show up to this too, right? Like it's important that um, we have a lot of people show up to this. I mean, for me, it's across the country, so it's a little hard to pull off. But I mean, if you're from the area, yeah, you should definitely show up, right? So anyway, I'm gonna leave the video there. If you liked it, make sure you get that like and subscribe. Make sure you follow me on Twitter, on BitChute, and on Parler. All those links are in the description, so you can find them all there.